Looks like there's also a chat. Okay. All right. So so basically with module 9, the idea is that in module 8, you were able to find some data that you wanted to use in your project, right? So whether that was in a CSV file or whether it was an API that you would use online, hopefully you found some data that you could use as a project. So the next step that's critical to learn is how to persist that to a database. So in Python, I think we talked, a little bit about some of the different ways that you could. Where's the actual objectives on this one right here? So we talked about some of the different ways that you could persist data, right? So you could store data to a file, which would store it locally. You could store data to a local relational database with something like SQLite. But really, like, what this is meant is to allow you to store it in an actual database management system. And the two most popular that we focus on in this class are SQL Server, which is actually, probably 75% of students choose to use SQL Server. And that's just because we already are using it in MIS in general. We're learning how to create tables and everything like that in SQL Server. So that's probably the most common choice, which is really, really solid. That's going to be used anywhere you go. Most places are going to have some sort of relational database. And then the other option is to use MongoDB as a database. So hopefully you all, I don't know if you guys read through this, it kind of goes through some of the different formats that you can store data in, and it talks about some of the main methods that Python allows to store data in. So I recommend going through this. So just on the Module 9 lecture, just read through this, follow some of these links, and it will hopefully provide you some good information on database programming in general from Python. So hopefully that helps you there. So the next step is to actually get the database set up. And this is where, if you remember, I said like the second part of the course kind of takes a shift between like learning straight Python, and you kind of we're going to branch out into additional technologies. So the first part of getting a database is you actually have to find a database that's set up. So there's a few options out there that you guys can do. Probably the easiest option, I would say, is to use the database that the MIS department provides. It used to be called Stairway, and the name has since changed. Does anybody know what it's called now? It's like Dark Sky or something like that. Does anybody know what it's called?
It's Dark Side.
Dark Side. There you go. So there is a database that the MIS department provides called Dark Side that you can connect to. So that's one option for access to a SQL Server instance. Another option is to install your own local version of SQL Server. And this one is probably the most technically challenging because you have to download SQL Server, you have to install it. I would recommend this if you are going to be like a DBA, right? So if you're going to stay in the realm of databases and work highly with SQL, which I'm not sure a ton of you are, but if you are going to do that, that's a really, really useful skill set to have, just getting a local instance installed and running with it there. So yeah, probably not a lot of you will use that option, but if you do, that works fine. And then the next option is to create a database on Azure. And this one is really, really valuable because most companies now are using some sort of cloud-based platform to do most of their like technical work, right? So most of them are using AWS, Google Cloud, Azure, Most companies out there are migrating to cloud hosted databases because it just works better from like an infrastructure perspective. So it's really, really good to get experience with Azure and setting that up. So real quickly, I'll just go through how I set up my Azure database. It's really not extremely difficult. Kind of just walk through, the steps that they have online. You can get free access. You can get a student subscription that gives you like $100 credit. So I'm going to post this link here in the chat. And I'll actually, so Matthew Brenner, you asked, can we do this assignment in Django by chance? You could do this assignment in Django. So Django will allow you to set up a backend database, and you could use SQL Server for that. However, Django is going to be, that would probably cover your requirements for like the presentation as well. So yeah, feel free to use Django. That's fine. You're going to be working with the SQL Server anyway. So yeah, that's fine. So I posted in the chat the link to sign up for Azure. Like I said, so you'll get $100 credit if you sign up. Just make sure that when you sign up, you use your Ag email account, and that pretty quickly will get you a subscription, and you'll be able to come in here and create an Azure database. So, okay, so right now you can see like right here, if I click on all resources in Azure, and by the way, like the main, oops, that's the fence that I'm going to be building soon. So the main access URL for Azure is portal.azure.com. I'm going to post that in the chat as well. Okay, so if you go to portal.azure.com and you'll log in with your student account that you create for Microsoft. And so right now, if you see, if I click on all resources, I have 2 items created. One of those is the server itself. So right here, this USU-MIS, this is an actual SQL server. And then right here is the database on that server. So USU-MIS is the server, and then MIS 5400 is the database. If you look at, you guys are probably all familiar with this. Hold on one second. So if you look at something like SQL Server Management Studio, this is what that looks like. So if I create that database and then I connect from SQL Server Management Studio, you can see like here is the server, USU-MIS, and then when you create it on Azure, it's going to have .database.windows.net, and then 1433 is just the port that it's going over. And then you can see that I have the one database on there called MIS 5400. So this is what it will look like, when you actually connect with something like SQL Server Management Studio. But inside of Azure, this is what it's going to look like. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to hurry and just create another one so you guys can see the steps that I took to do that. Okay, and by the way, so this is being recorded. So for those of you that got in here a little bit late, I'll post this and you'll be able to watch it. I'll just post it to Canvas. So, all right, so right here, if I want to create a SQL Server database, I can just come in here and search for SQL Server. Actually, let me search in here and search for SQL database. Okay, right here. So right here, SQL database. So I want to create a new one. Okay, so the first thing that you have to select is the subscription that you want it to be associated with. So you can see here, I have 2 different subscriptions. One is Azure for Students, which I have far surpassed my $100 credit there, and it really gives me no benefit to use that. So I have another subscription created. And when after you use up your $100 credit, if you want to continue to do stuff, they'll make you create a subscription where you provide a credit card. And just, be careful on that, because if you accidentally create like some massive, amazing SQL Server database, like it actually can run up some price. So make sure that if you give them your credit card, you're monitoring in Azure, what's actually happening with that. So be aware of that. Okay, so I'm gonna select the subscription of here in CodeDev. So this is the one that I have linked to a credit card and everything like that. And then as far as the resource group, so this is just a way to like group, if you have different projects going on, if you have different classes where you're using Azure, this allows you to group your resources in a given manner. So I have like an MIS 5400 group, and any resources that I'm going to create for this class, I just put in that group, just so you can kind of keep track of them. Okay, so this is, if you don't have a group created, I think it will make you create a new one right here. So pretty straightforward. Database details. So when you want to create a new database, so first thing you have to do is give it a name. So I'll create one called like MIS 5400 in class test. So you can name the database whatever you want. And then the server, you can also name it whatever you want. I'm going to actually go ahead and create a new one, because most of you won't already have a server created if you're just creating a database. By the way, if any of you have questions, just unmute yourself and shout them out. So anybody have any questions so far? All right, silence is golden, I hope. Okay, so yeah, so instead of creating this database on the existing server that I have, I'm just gonna go ahead and create a new one so you guys can see that process. So if you click create new, over here at the right-hand side, you can put in some details. So I'll just put like USU MIS in class, and admin, make sure that you remember whatever you type in here. So I'm gonna create the username as MIS 5400 and the password as uppercase M IS dot 5400, uppercase M lowercase is dot 5400. Okay, so you create the login that's associated with the server, and you can see right here, like it takes whatever you put in the name and it appends on .database.windows.net. And then you can choose a location, probably go west because that's the closest to us, the closest region to us. So if I click OK right there, so that's going to create a new server. Do you want to use SQL Elastic Pool? No, you probably don't need to. And then this part is important, so make sure that you're watching. So if you create the default database right here, this general purpose with 32 gigs of storage and stuff, I believe that one's a relatively expensive database. So if you click on this, let me see. So if you click on that additional details, you have other options. So by default, this general purpose database would be an estimated cost of $380 a month. And ain't nobody got that much money for students. So make sure that you come in here and you select looking for basic, standard, or premium. And if you go to standard, this is one that I usually do. So I usually do a standard and select like maybe 30 gigs. And you can see over here, it will tell you what the estimated cost per month is. So just kind of be aware of that. Maybe get a little more power. So I'll do 20 DTUs and 30 gigs of data. So that's an estimated $30 a month. So that's not too bad. So I'm going to go ahead and choose that. So that's right here. So just make sure that as you're creating the database, you go and change the default compute plus storage, because for whatever reason, they made the default pretty beefy. and it can be expensive. So I think on the student account, if you use the Azure student subscription, they actually limit what you can create unless you link it to a credit card. So just be aware of that. Okay. And then you click next and it will have you go through the networking setup. So if you have no access, this means that only other Azure resources you create will be able to connect to that database. So only if you create a Python script and ran it inside of Azure would you be able to connect to it. So you're probably going to want to select public endpoint or private endpoint. I do public endpoint, and then you can just configure firewall rules that can allow, you can lock it down to just you, or like if you're working as a group, you can let just people in your group access the database. And I'll say yes at the current client IP address, and I'll say yes, allow Azure services and resources to access this server. So that's those firewall rules. Additional settings. So you can actually create a database with the sample, like AdventureWorks database if you want. I'm just going to choose none because I don't want any existing data there. But you can create one with a sample data in there. Database collation. So this is basically saying, hey, if you want to store like UTF-8 characters, I just leave the default on that and you'll be just fine. Advanced data security. Yeah, I don't want that right now. Tags, you don't need to worry anything about tags. And then next, review and create. So you can see I'm creating it under my Peer Code Dev subscription. If you have an Azure student subscription with $100, you might as well use that up. So create it under that. Maybe create a resource group to kind of group this into a project you're working on. Get a region as close to the West US as you can. Here's the database name. Here's the server name. And here's basically the type of server that I selected. Okay, so I'm going to click create. And you'll get this little notification up here that it is deploying and creating the database. And you find folks that have actually created like a local instance of SQL Server, you'll appreciate how nice this is because it's actually, very, very straightforward as far as creating it. So, okay, so now if I go here to my all resources, after that's done, I should see those pop up here. So it's still in progress. Any questions while we're waiting for that to happen? So Matthew asked if this is what I use at work. So funny story, so I actually just barely changed jobs, which is part of the reason I've been kind of slow on this class. But yes, at work, where I used to work at CSC, we used Azure, but not for SQL Server. We actually used it for other servers. We hosted other servers on Azure. We had on-premise databases. Usually, if you're working with with larger banks and stuff like that, they still have pretty stringent requirements on having databases in the cloud. But where I'm at now, which is a company called Degreed, yeah, we use Azure databases. So we have a SQL database hosted in Azure, and that is what we use, yes. And like I said, it's very, very common way. Most companies now are using cloud-based resources just because it's so much easier to manage. Okay, so if I refresh, you can see that I now have, so you can see this right here, USU MIS in class server that I created. Okay, and one other thing that you might need to do to connect to that is if you click on the server, and then down here under security, there's firewalls and virtual networks. So you can see like right now, public access is open, but it still has a firewall in place. So only connections from this IP address are going to be allowed to connect. If you want to open this up to everyone, which is what I usually do just because I don't usually leave it out there very long, and I create credentials. So if you create like a new firewall rule, and again, this is on the server, not the database itself. This is on the server instance. You go to security, firewalls and virtual networks. So I'm going to do 0.0.0.0 as my starting IP address. And I'm going to do 255.255.255.255 as my ending address. So that is essentially saying let anybody in. So regardless of which IP address they're coming from, go ahead and let them in. So you can limit it to just people in your group if you want to filter by their IP address. If you create, fairly secure credentials for this database, if you just leave it for the rest of the semester or whatever, I don't think it's a big issue to go ahead and open it up to everybody. Okay, so Logan asked, I gotten a little late. Is Azure something we are required to use, or you're just showing so we can use it if we want? So this is not required to use. You have a few options for SQL Server, Logan. So you can either use Azure, you can use the database that the MIS department provides called DarkSide. That one's probably the easiest way if you don't really want to go through the setup process of using setting up SQL Server on your own. Using DarkSide is the easiest. Or you could install SQL Server to your local machine. So those are some of your options for SQL Server. Okay, so I've configured this firewall rule to let anybody in. And if I go here to all resources, I gotta save that, I guess. Save. Make sure you click save. Okay, so now in all resources, you can see that I have this new database right here. And let me just click on that real quick and show you some of the things on there. So if you click on that database, they make it really easy to get the connection string that you need to use from Python. So if you click on the database, and right from the overview page, there is a link that says show database connection strings. And if you click on ODBC, this is the connection string that I have in code for our class. The only difference is I have an updated driver of ODBC driver 17. So you can come in here and get your ODBC connection. Okay, so one other step that you may want to take after you create it is just trying to connect with SQL Server Management Studio. So connecting with Python is one thing, and you can use that in your scripts and everything like that, but it's always useful just to make sure that you can connect from like SQL Server Management Studio. So if I come in here and make sure that I can connect to the new one, so this is USU MIS in class. Login was MIS 5400, password was MIS.5400. Okay, so you can see I was able to connect to that, and I can go and I can see the new database that I created. Right now it doesn't have any tables or anything like that, it's just a clean database. Okay, so hopefully if you're using, if you don't have a database set up yet and you want to use Azure, because this is recorded, you can go through and replay that, and you should be able to get a database set up in Azure. So any questions on that? Okay, cool. Glad this is helping. Okay, so the next step after you've got your database set up is to jump back into the Python code. So I think I got a couple questions on like, where do I run this code and stuff like that. So yeah, this is still code that you'll want to run or at least develop in PyCharm. That's just kind of the easiest way to do it. So if you open up the module 9, so first of all, I do recommend going through like some of these links on the data persistence file. which are also laid out in, so I tried to lay some of those out in the Module 9 lecture page right here. So this is kind of a more robust summary of what's going to be inside of this data persistence.py. But in general, this is just talking about data persistence, in general, like how you connect to databases, some of the common functionality that Python is built around connecting to databases, et cetera. If you're using Django, who was it that asked about that? Matthew asked about using Django. So if you're going to use Django, Django uses what's called an object relational mapper. So you might want to brush up a little bit on that because that's what Django uses. So, so make sure you're kind of reading through those and understanding like data persistence in general. And then if you're choosing to use SQL Server, really if you go through these two files right here and make sure you understand what's going on, you should be good to go. But basically, Python, in order to connect to SQL Server, you have to have a third-party library. These are sometimes called drivers, but these are basically third-party Python code that you're going to install with pip that will allow you to connect to SQL Server. And this could also be Oracle. Basically any relational database is going to be very, very similar. And that's because of what they call the DB API 2. So they try to make it a consistent fill regardless of which database you're connecting to, like whichever relational database you're connecting to. So right here, I'm just going to debug this code. You do have to install PyODBC. And if you want to use this driver 17, you will have to download and install this from Microsoft. This is just kind of a newer driver. By default, all Windows machines will have 13 installed. And Macs, you always have to go through some sort of installation process, unfortunately. So, but once you install that and you get PyODBC, ready to go, which again, if you're having any questions on that, let me know, or maybe post a discussion thread and we can help you out. But once you get that installed, this is where the connection string goes. So right at first, like all that the connection string is literally just a string, and it's got a few different components. So you have to specify the driver that you're going to use, which in our case is going to be the ODBC driver. You have to specify, let me actually stop this so it's not blue. You have to specify the server that you're connecting to. So this is the name of the server that I created in Azure. 1433 is the port, so that's the default. You don't technically have to have that. Like this would actually work. But I leave it in there to be explicit. And then the database that you want to connect to. So I'm going to connect to this server, and I'm going to connect to the MIS 5400 database. The user ID that I set up, remember in Azure, was MIS 5400, and the password was MIS.5400. It's always a good idea to encrypt. So what this is going to do is this is going to make the traffic between my computer and the database on Azure encrypted, which is always smart. Trust server certificate, you can either say yes or no. I did have to have, I think there was one student that was trying to connect where they actually had to change that to no in order to get it to connect. And then you have a connection timeout, and that's basically how long do you want this PyODBC driver to wait before it says it failed to connect, okay? So we have PyODBC, we have the connection string. Now we're gonna actually connect to it, and I have a question here. So Sean said, do you have to connect your Azure database to the SQL Server, or can you just connect the Azure database to Python? You can just do it to Python if you want to. So opening it up in SQL Server Management Studio, which I'm assuming that's what you're talking about, that is optional, but I highly recommend it. So if you're familiar with SQL Server Management Studio and you're using SQL Server, like this just gives you another way to verify, that you're able to connect, that you're not having firewall issues, that the database actually got created. When we create tables using the Python script, you'll be able to see them here. So it's just kind of a, this is a really good UI for the database itself. And then the Python script is meant just to be, this is really meant to be run like, a nightly build. So like you're getting new data every night. So you're going to write a script that's going to connect to the database, push data in, and then disconnect. So the Python script is really meant for like, it's meant to be placed in an automated system, if that makes sense. So did that answer your question, Sean?
Yeah, that's good. Thank you.
Okay, cool. Okay, so now that I have PyODBC installed and I have my connection string configured, I'm going to debug this. And so this connect method on PyODBC, so this will actually return a connection object. So like an instance of a connection class is what it actually returns. So you pass, the first parameter is the connection string, and the second parameter is whether you want to auto commit. I usually say auto commit equals true if you're connecting with SQL Server, just because SQL Server by default usually has implicit commits. You don't have to like explicitly go and commit every transaction. So I just set that to true. And here's the magic. So if you go to the next step, and if you're able to get here, then you have connected to the database and you're in good shape. So most students are going to run into a hiccup right here. Like this is a very, very common place to run into a hiccup, is actually connecting to the database. And and it's just because there can be so many different variabilities to why it's failing. You got firewall rules, you have networking issues. So like, if you're not on an internet connection, or if it's a, kind of a bad internet connection, you won't be able to connect. You have, if your credentials aren't correct, or if your connection string is bad in any way, like this connect will actually fail. So if I go and I like change my password and put an A at the end of that, and then try to connect, so it's going to try to connect, and I'm instantly going to get an error back. Make sure that you look in the console when you get an error back. And usually the exception messages you get back are pretty straightforward. So you can see like on this one, it says login failed for user MIS 5400, right? So that's pretty clear that something is wrong with my credentials. If you have network connection issues, a lot of times it will just say that the server can't be reached, or something of that nature. So make sure that when, if you aren't able to connect, make sure that you look in the console and look for the exception that's being thrown. And that should help you get it resolved. So, okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and fix my credentials and connect. And then once you're connected, the next step is to create a cursor. And again, this is all following DB API 2.0, which is, if I look at this right here, so this is one that I recommend you read right here. It's called the PEP 249. And you can see like this goes through like the connection object. So this shows you how you can connect, and it shows you how you can work with cursor objects. So make sure that you go through that and understand that. Okay. So now that we've connected, I'm going to create a cursor object. So off of the connection object that I created, I call the cursor method. And this actually returns a cursor. And in Python, or sorry, in SQL Server, like a cursor, this isn't quite the same thing as having a cursor open on a database, but it allows you to execute SQL code. So the most powerful statement with PyODBC is this execute method, because you can literally pass in any SQL that you want and it'll execute it on the database. Okay, so I could pass in here like drop database and boom, it would do it. As long as the user that I connected with has access to do what you tell it to do, cursor.execute will execute that code. So you can drop databases, you can drop tables, etc. So what I'm doing right here, this is just checking to see if this table, do you guys hear my family yelling? Sorry if you do. So this is going to create this table called CPI Spring 2020 MKP if it does not exist. So it's going to check if it exists, and if it doesn't, it's going to create it. Again, this is T-SQL code. So if you need help, if you haven't taken the database class and you need help writing SQL, I can help you do that. I can help you get your schema set up and everything like that. So if you haven't taken that class, let me know and I can help you write the SQL. This one right here, again, is going to check if this table exists, and if it doesn't exist, it's going to create it. Give me 1 second. Sorry about that. Okay, so I have my cursor here, so I'm going to go ahead and just go to the next line. So this is going to execute that. And again, this is where it is useful to have something like SQL Server Management Studio, because you can go in there and just verify that the table was created. So, okay, yeah, here's the table that I created, CPI Spring 2020 MKP. So that table was created. And this is, this is useful in scripts. Like, let's say that you are writing a script that would truncate that table every night and then, get a new data file and populate that table with it, or maybe like stage data. So this is where you'd kind of start to write that code right here, is in the Python script. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do on this one is I'm going to just insert some data. So we have the Fred CPI CSV file that we've already worked with before in class. And I'm going to open that, and then I'm going to insert it into the database. So this is important right here. So when you're creating insert statements, this is what's called using like parameterized variables, so that you can sanitize the input. So this basically makes that SQL safe from SQL injection. So you build up the query like this. And for you guys, it would be very, very similar. So you have insert into, and then the table that you're going to insert into, and then the columns that you're going to insert into. So we're going to insert into observation date and CPI. And then you put values, and then you put these question marks as placeholders. Okay, so this is what you set your insert query up as. And then when I call, and then I'm going to open up the CSV file right here, open up the Fred CSV file, and I'm going to read it using CSV reader. So this will return actually what this expects is a list of tuples. So execute many expects a list of tuples to be passed in. So the first parameter is the query, and the second parameter is going to be a list of tuples. Okay, so if I look at this and hover over it, oh, it's not showing me that right now. Let's see if I can show you the IntelliSense that shows what it expects. So if you go to execute many, oh, it's not going to show you. If you go to the documentation for the DB API, it will show you. So first parameter is the query, which is just a string. And the second parameter is a list of tuples. So if I go through this, so I'm going to go to the next line. first set up my insert query. I'm going to open the file. And you guys all should be able to do this. If you're doing it at the same time as me, we might get a lot of rows in there, but that's just fine. So I'm going to open the file, and then I'm going to call execute many. So this is now inserting into that table. So if I go back to SQL Server Management Studio just to look at that, I should be able to select minus 400. Actually, you can't specify database names in Azure, unfortunately. Okay, so you can see here, like, there's 1,318 rows in there, and now there's 1,434. So it's inserting rows into that table. And when it's done, it will come down here. So you always, when you're done doing transactions like this, you do always want to be careful and just call the commit. Even though SQL Server has implicit commits, you still want to make sure that you're calling this commit right here, and then make sure that you're also closing that database connection so that you don't leave that open. Okay, so that is connecting to a database, using like generic like execute functions for whatever you want to do. Execute many expects you to pass in a list of tuples. So that's some of the general functionalities. Does anybody have any questions up to this point? Okay, cool. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is show you how to read from that table. So I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to just connect again. So notice that I'm using the same connection string, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to create a cursor off of that connection. And if you want to execute a select query, so you write the query, just like, this is, again, just straight up T-SQL. And then I'm going to execute it off of the cursor. And when you do a select query, like basically anything that returns a result set, in order to get to that data, you have to call this fetch all. And so when you call fetch all, it's going to treat this like a collection. So you have to iterate over that. So you can iterate over each one, and then so in this case, I'm just going to print the row out. So if I iterate over that and then look at my console, you can see that it brought the data back and printed it out. So one thing to note, when we got the data back, notice that it actually converted that data type to like a Python datetime object. So even though it kind of went in as a string from Fred's CSV, because I had the column specified as a datetime column in SQL Server, that will return it as a Python datetime. So kind of be aware of that. If you get, if you have dates, a datetime column type in SQL Server and it comes back, that's going to map that to a Python datetime object. And then you have to, kind of use that if you want to get to the dates, which in module 8, if you look at the CSV examples, I think there was some examples of what, how you can work with values that represent date times. There's some samples there. So, okay, so that's reading data back. And again, I'm going to close the connection, and then I'm going to delete that connection. So, okay, so that's writing to the database, reading from the database. If you wanted to delete rows, it would be, you'd want to have a query very, very similar to this, where you had, you were using the question marks to indicate the value that you're going to delete. And let's see, I wanted to go through this one right here as well. Okay. If you are getting data that comes in the form of JSON, So let's say that you end up getting your data from an API, so a web-based API. I think we've talked about the fact that most of those are going to return some sort of JSON structure. Before you add that into the database, you have to convert it into a tuple. So this is kind of an example of how you do that. And the first thing I need to do is get that connection string. So I'm going to copy that from this one. Okay, so now I have my connection string. Connecting is going to be the same. I'm going to create my cursor. Let me see if that table exists real quick. So that table doesn't exist yet in this database, so I'll actually uncomment this so that it gets created. So I'm going to create a table called MKP Today I Learned JSON. And then I'm going to write my insert query. And basically all that we're going to do is get the title of the Today I Learned entry and the domain that it came from. So again, this is where you have to kind of drill down into the JSON to get the data that you want. So I'm going to make sure I connect. Again, once you're connected, that's a pretty good step. Usually connections are some of the harder issues. Okay, so I'm going to build my insert query. I'm going to open up the JSON file. Oh, I'm going to move it over there first. So now if I rerun this, it's going to fail. Does anybody know why? Anybody want to take a stab at why this would fail if I rerun it? Okay, I'll show you. I'll show you the error. Okay, it's going to fail because there's already an object named MKP TIL JSON in the database. So when you're interacting with a SQL Server database from Python, SQL Server bubbles up some pretty useful errors. So just make sure that you're looking at those. So I actually need to go and stop this and just delete that line or comment it out so that I don't try to create that table again. Another option is to make it just like I did over here, where you check to see if the table exists before you create it. But I'll just comment it out for right now. Okay, so if your the data that you're using that you acquired from Module 8 is JSON, once you have the JSON, to get it into SQL Server, if you're not using MongoDB, if you're going to use SQL Server, the first thing you want to do is load the data. So remember when you call load, it will convert that into a Python dictionary. So at this point, data is an actual Python dictionary. And what I want to do right here is I want to get down to the repeating list of the data. So if I look at my raw data right here, I want to get down to like the children right here. This is notice that it's a list. You can tell that by the square bracket. And that's where all of my repeating rows are. And then I'm going to create a rows to insert just because I want kind of a staging list to put that in. And I'm going to go through each row and then I'm going to append them as a tuple. So again, this execute many wants a list of tuples, and that's, tuples represents a database row. We've all learned that from the SQL Server class if you've taken it. And then a list is basically a collection. So a list of tuples maps to a database table. So I have my empty list, and I'm going to append a whole bunch of tuples. And basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to get this entry. If I go and look at this in my expression evaluator, and say entry, and just look and see what data is. So if I look at that one and say evaluate, okay, so data for that entry is basically, here's my domain, here's my subreddit, here is all the other things that you get with the Reddit stuff. So I'm going to get the title, and I'm going to get the title right there, and I'm going to get the domain, and I'm going to add those to a tuple, and then I'm going to append that to the rows to insert list. So this will go through for each of the entries in there and add it to that list. And then when I'm done, this is where I'm actually going to connect to the database with my insert query. So now it's going to call this insert query and pass in the list of tuples and insert it. So if I continue on that, it's going to go down to my commit. But if I go back to my database, check it. So number one, if I refresh, I should see the new table there, which I do. And then if I go select from it, I should be able to see those rows inside of there. So boom, so there's the today I learned rows. And now that data's persisted, and that gives us a whole bunch of other opportunities now that it's in an actual database. And we can join it to other reference tables. We can have constraint checks on that data. Allows you to search the data with SQL queries, etc. So, okay, so that's kind of it for SQL Server. Hopefully, if you want, if you're going to persist your data in SQL Server, that gives you what you need. I know that there's some of you out there asking, because I get this question every semester, and they're like, well, why don't I just come into SQL Server Management Studio and say pass import data, and then like select the CSV file I want to upload and everything like that. And that's a really good question, because there's always more than one way to skin a cat. There's more than one way to get data into SQL Server. The main benefit of using a Python script to do that is you have the ability to look at your data beforehand and to manipulate your data beforehand without trying to do it inside of an SSIS package. So you can actually come in here and use any of the Python modules we've looked at to supplement that data or to validate that data before you're inserting it into the database. And it also allows you to make it a repeatable process. So if I wanted to run this every night, I could write a script and then schedule it as like a scheduled task and have it run every night to do stuff. So that is one of the benefits of that. So what other questions do you guys have out there?
So I have a question.
Sure.
Whenever you want to write a SQL query, like you would do in the SQL Server Management Studio, do you always do the curse.execute?
Yeah. If it's just a general query, you'll want to just use cursor.execute. Yes.
Okay, and curse.execute can do anything from select and viewing things to deleting and changing data.
Yep. Yeah. The one place where you really wouldn't use just execute is the insert, because when you insert, you actually have to pass both the query and you have to pass the data set that's being inserted. And so it has two parameters to it. So like right here where I'm actually inserting rows, instead of just calling execute, I call execute many, because the first parameter is the raw SQL query, and the second one is the list of tuples that I want to actually insert into the table. So execute many is a little bit different. But if you want to know all the methods, so if you just search for the API 2, or go to one of the links that I posted in the material. So this will show you some of the different methods you could use, like execute. This has the execute many. But yeah, basically you have execute many that you can use. So there is one if you want to execute a stored proc. There is one called .call proc. So if you're a fan of stored procedures in databases, which I'm a huge fan of stored procedures, instead of using execute, you could use .call proc. But just make sure that you go through like this documentation. It's not super intense. Like they tried to make it very simple. They didn't try to make too many methods that you have to use. So basically the execute ones are for executing code, and fetching is so that you can read through a result set. So fetch one, fetch many, fetch all, etc. So yeah, so just kind of look over this documentation if you end up using SQL Server and PyODBC, or SQL Server or any relational database really. So
Thank you.
Yep. And then Logan asks, is persisting data simply moving data into a database? And yeah, so really it's more general than that. Like if you talk about persisting data, you can persist data on a file, but the real difference is after you persist the data, right? So after it's stored, how do you access it? So there are so many different options on how you can access it. If you stored all your data in like a simple text file, it's not going to be searchable, right? You're not going to be able to have reference constraints on that data. You're not going to be able to do a count of how many rows exist and stuff like that as easily. So the main thing is to get it into a database management system, persisted to a database management system. And there's a really good article. Let me send you this so that you can read it. Since you asked, Logan, I will share this with you. So polyglot persistence talks about all the different ways that you can persist data, because there's multiple ways you can do it. You can persist it in a relational database. You can use a document store. You can use something like Elasticsearch or Solr that allows you to search by keyword, like a search engine would use. So there's a lot of different ways to persist the data. And really, the one that you choose is about how you're going to access that data when you're done persisting it. So hopefully that answers your question. Okay. Let's see here. Do you guys have any more questions on that? On module 9. So the goal at the end of this week, so I did change the due date of module 9 to be the end of this week. And that's basically what I'm going to do for all the modules going forward. So if you look on the home page, basically this week, I want you to be focused on data persistence. So by the end of the week, hopefully you have data acquired. So you've chosen your data set, and you've also got it persisted into some sort of database management system like SQL Server or MongoDB. So if you're going to use MongoDB, that's slightly different. And I'm not sure how many students are using MongoDB. Are any of you using MongoDB? Anybody on the call? Okay, I'm going to assume that maybe some of you still are, you just don't want to talk. But there's additional material on how to use MongoDB. They have really good documentation and stuff on that. But so hopefully by the end of the week, you have your data acquired and you have it so that it's in a database. And then what I've done for kind of the rest of the semester is so we're going to focus on data analytics, because after you have this data persisted, when you have your data set, you guys want to do something with it, right? So I'm going to find a really good COVID-19 data set that we can use. And the next 2 weeks we'll be focusing on how you can use Jupyter Notebook to analyze that data. So to do, show some charts on it, do some analysis on it so that you can start to gain insights into that data. And that will basically be, what the project is doing data analytics. So I did cut out some of the Flash stuff. I'll probably still post something about it, but I think based on the feedback I've gotten, most of you want to focus on analytics. So the next 2 weeks, we'll be focused on analytics. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to have the modules open up at the beginning of the week, and the assignment will be due at the end of the week. And sorry, this is all jacked up, but that's how it's going to be. So we basically have like 2 more kind of lectures and assignments that will be on data analytics, and then the final project. So, and again, I'm going to use for examples and stuff in class. I'm going to try to find a good COVID-19, just because there's lots of good stuff out there. Like, hopefully you guys are able to read through some of these new articles and realize which ones did their data analytics and which ones didn't. So, okay, any questions? Any other questions?
I have one.
Sure.
I don't remember my login information for the SQL Server here on campus.
Okay.
Do you know what those are?
You're talking about for the dark side database, right?
Right. Yeah.
I have no idea. Let me reach out to probably Dr. Olson is the only person I know that would know that. And I think he has somebody that manages it, and I'll get you in touch with them. Now, you do have to be connected to the VPN to connect to that. Are you connected to the VPN when you're trying to connect?
I'm not sure. I was just going to use like the Citrix or the USU.apps thing.
Okay.
Will that work?
It will work, but if you're... Oh, is that the VPN?
Yeah, Citrix, the VPN.
Okay. Yeah, Sean, let me get you in touch with... I'll have to ask Dr. Olson who's managing that server, and then they can help you get stuff set up. Yeah, because that's by far going to be the easiest way to get a database set up if you don't want to go through Azure, if you don't want to install it locally. That's going to be the easiest way. So if any of you are trying to use MongoDB, there are materials in here for MongoDB. So MongoDB right here has some examples for how to connect, and very similar to how you can get a free database for SQL Server. You can get a free like 500 megabyte instance of MongoDB from MLab. So you can do that. So, all right. If nobody has any other questions, then I'll leave it at that. I'm getting stuff graded, and I'll get that back to you. And hopefully, if you're in groups, hopefully I can start setting up like hangouts with individual groups. So if you have questions, you can get back to me, but I'm looking forward to jumping into some of the data analytics stuff. There's a lot we can do with that now that you have, your data. So that's that. Okay. You guys must be worn out by coronavirus. You guys all doing good? All right. Well, I hope you all are. So, oh, Matt wants to know how working from home is. Well, you heard my kids earlier, right? It's a little stressful, but it's good. We're figuring it out.
I still go into the office, so.
Yeah.
This is Matt.
Yeah, there's like 4 people that still go into the CSC office just because I really miss playing pickleball, actually. That's probably the hardest part. Not playing pickleball.
I got tired of my database access getting reset when we go prod to dev, because I don't have
Gotcha.
prod access, and then they have to like re-add my IP at home. So I just keep going now.
Yeah, cool. This company that I just joined is 100% remote, so it's all normal for them. They're all used to working from home, and that's what I'll be doing
Okay.
going forward. So I have to get used to it now.
I can't work from home. It's too hard.
You know, so I joined this company that I'm with now 5 years ago in 2015, and I couldn't work from home. So I worked for them for 6 months, and then I left. And it's just because I'm used to, you know, I worked on a help desk, and usually if I had questions, I'd go to people directly and talk to them directly in person. But after 5 years, like, it's a different type of learning you can do if you can learn to focus at home. You just have to shut your kids out and put on some noise canceling headphones. But
You're a database developer, right?
yeah, I'm a
There.
database developer and data engineering. So
What
yeah,
do
I'll
you
be
do
doing like,
exactly? Is that just like a lot of backend API stuff, or is it just like creating tables and working
yeah,
with
so the
developers?
database portion is mostly SQL Server. So I'd say it's probably like 60% SQL. So yeah, you're designing tables, creating indexes, normalizing data. But then a lot of it, you know, you can go up the stack a little bit and start working a little bit on the data access layer written in C#. So basically the same thing that we just talked about right here with Python, where, you know, you're going from the application to the database, you know, and reading from it. So go up the stack a little bit that way. And then a lot of what I'll be working on is using like, so we're going to use like Apache Airflow to make like data pipelines. So in addition to just storing the data in SQL Server, they also have like an Elasticsearch instance, and you have to find ways to keep data in sync, you know, make sure it's in both of them, et cetera. So.
Okay, cool. We have a C# repository, but it's super depreciated. I've had to go into it a couple of times. It's several hundred lines store procedures.
Oh yeah, yeah. When
Definitely.
you want to try to keep business logic out of SQL, and that's, you know, technically, like as a database developer, that's part of your job, is to be like, hey, .NET developer, like you need to move that business logic up to your end. So yeah, it's really cool. So
Yeah, we use Django for our backend, so we mostly just use the ORM, and
yep.
we do execute those C# procedures from the Django views, but yeah.
Cool. Right. Well, hopefully you guys are all doing well. If you need to do some one-on-one hangouts, let me know. I guess we'll call it a night. So Jamie posted free courses March 2020 by Real Python. You know what? I subscribe to this guy and I get spammed all the time, but I think that he does some really, really good Python stuff. So yeah, I think that's a really good resource. But he'll send, if you subscribe to this, like I get emails like every day from the site, but it's some really, really good stuff. So yeah, thanks for posting that. So it's a lot of stuff you can learn online.
Those are just they're like free classes that they released for the COVID for people to do. They don't have anything to do with the class, but you can download them now and then go back to them when there's like a facial recognition and extra features for 3.8. So I just thought,
oh yeah, that's right.
Python
That's
class
really cool.
people might be interested.
Yeah, absolutely. He's got great graphics too. This site does, whatever it is. Using pandas and Python to explore your data set. That looks like a good one. Yeah, see? Yep, tons of online resources. Really, really
And
good.
I haven't been spammed, so sorry, I did not. I downloaded them and I haven't had anything, so, but.
You haven't got anything?
Good thing to be wary of, I guess.
Yeah, I get it from Dan at RealPy. Like it's says his name is Dan at Real Python. I haven't unsubscribed because it's usually like semi-useful stuff, but
Yeah, that the website has definitely helped me. So
cool. Yeah, that's really good to know. Maybe I'll share that with other people too. So, okay. All right. All right, Bryce, so you need me to look at your screen for Mod 8? Can do that, so.
Yeah.
Logan, do you have any other questions before we head out? Before I jump on with Bryce? Or? Okay, cool. Have a good one. Okay, so yeah, Bryce, I think you can, let me see if I can. Make host. Okay, so I changed you to be the host. So now if you, I think you should be able to share your screen.
Yeah, just 1 second.
And let me, I'm gonna stop recording this just because I think we're done here.